that. Okay. So can you guys see my flyer right now? Let's see.
Yep, now we can.
Now we can.
So briefly, I think there's still some folks logging in, but I don't want to, run out of time for all your questions. So I was just going to have our panelists today. We have CJ, Jason, Lauren, and Steve, who are going to be your presenters, just kind of giving their story. And I have a few questions prepared, but also you guys will be welcome to jump in at any time or type a question in the chat box. And I will have you guys go in alphabetical order. So CJ, we'll have you start off. So firstly, I just want to thank you guys all for coming. We spun this out of our Engage Mentor program. And the reason being, we wanted to make sure that we were covering topics of interest, even without having personal one-on-one meetings. And so one of the top priorities that people were interested in was fundraising, of course, which is hard to do and extremely important. So with that, I'll just pass it over to CJ to give a little bit of his story and background.
Yeah, Jessica, thanks. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for organizing this. She said I'm CJ. I work for Right Height, kind of the large industrial safety.
Is everyone, wait, CJ, you just froze, I think. Is everyone having him frozen?
Yeah, his audio is fading out.
Okay.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Okay, you froze for a minute. Your screen's a little frozen. If it helps, I don't know if people want to turn off their video, maybe, I don't know if that helps. If you're, keep the panelists on, of course, but. All right, CJ, are you still there? Oh, did he?
I think we lost him.
All right, let's go next to
That's
Jason.
why you have 4 panelists.
Jason, go ahead.
Thanks, Jessica. So my name is Jason Perry. I currently serve as the Vice President of Development and Communications at Penfield Children's Center and Penfield Montessori Academy, UWM charter school. For the last 15 years, I've worked in nonprofit development, creating major gift and estate giving programs, leading comprehensive campaigns, building annual campaigns, and securing multi-million-dollar gifts to support new nonprofit initiatives. Back in 2017, I began doing a little bit of work with a collection of early stage and startup companies to help support their strategy development and execution around capital raises. But I've been very fortunate for these last 15 years to work for 3 wonderful nonprofit organizations, UWM, Milwaukee Public Radio, Marquette University, and now Penfield. In addition to my role as a gift officer, I actually taught UWM's fundraising and development in the nonprofit sector graduate course for about 6 years. And I continue to do some consulting with nonprofits looking to grow their fundraising programs. So I thank everybody for dialing in today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share something that I get really excited about, which is fundraising. And I look forward to learning a lot from the fellow panelists today.
Yeah, sorry, my Wi-Fi crashed amidst the introduction, so sorry about that.
Go ahead, your turn then.
Okay, so I don't know how much everyone caught. I'm CJ. Jessica, thanks for organizing this. Thanks for everyone for calling in. I'm a VC, early stage venture capitalist for Right Height. They're a large industrial safety business located in Milwaukee, based here. Joined the team about 6 months ago to start up the venture capital practice for the company. And we're still getting that going, and we've made 1 investment thus far, and we're kind of getting our ducks in a row as we get going here. But I'm focused a lot in kind of the future of manufacturing, autonomous trucking, the future of supply chain, and things like that. Before joining Right Hood, I was a part of the whole AmFam crew for a long time. So I was on the venture capital team there at AmFam for a number of years. And before that was part of the corporate development, business development team before that. So Wisconsin born and raised, have kind of stuck around the area, went Marquette grad. So, looking forward to meeting all of you and, answering any questions you guys have.
Thanks. Lauren, go ahead.
Sure. I'm Lauren Peterson. I think I've had the opportunity to work with many of you on this call in my role as entrepreneur in residence at the Lubar Entrepreneurship Center on the UWM campus. Have worked with Brian Thompson for a number of years now, teaching the Southeast Wisconsin I-Corps program, which I know some of you have participated in. In a previous life, I have been a CPA. I've run biotech companies, although my background is really on the business side, not on the scientific side. Have raised a lot of money from venture capital in the process. Spent, after I sold my last company in 2010, I spent 6 years as a managing director at Venture Investors, which I think is the largest venture capital fund in the state of Wisconsin, headquartered over in Madison. And since 2017, as I said, I've served as entrepreneur in residence at UWM, as well as doing similar sorts of work at Concordia and the Medical College. So I'm looking forward to talking to you today about what I know about raising money from angel and venture capitalists.
Great. And Steve?
Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Vasuri, and I am currently the CEO of a startup company in Madison area. We're developing in vitro disease models for drug discovery, particularly in the neurosciences area. So my background, I'm a PhD biomedical engineer from Northwestern. My undergrad was from Marquette. After graduate school, I went out to California, worked at a national research laboratory out there doing applied research. So really all my career has been in healthcare spaces. So started out there doing applied research in healthcare and started to invent technologies that were licensed out to some startups in the area. So that was really in the shadows of Silicon Valley. And so that was my first taste of sort of startup world and fundraising and getting companies off the ground. And I really, was enamored with that process. We, acted as a sort of a research arm for these startup companies. And so I got to see how these companies were formed in the early stages. That sort of whet my appetite. And so we are looking to move back to Wisconsin when our family was starting to have our kids, and I got hooked up with a small startup here that was quite successful, stayed on with a couple of different acquisitions, so worked in big companies as well, see the benefits of both sides of that, small and big companies, but really wanted to return to the startup world. So I started my own startup company, which was mildly successful, and then joined with my current company, STEM Farm, a few years back. So I've done plenty of fundraising, plenty of grant writing, et cetera, to help fund some of these companies, but I'm also an angel investor with Golden Angels in Milwaukee. So it's a 100-member angel investment group, which we could talk about today too. But so I also look at deal flow and I look at funding startup companies. And so I've worked sort of both sides of that equation of fundraising and also funding companies. So that's my background.
Thanks, all of you. I'm super excited. What a great, you guys have so much experience. And I have a few questions lined up, and, some I'll point to one of you, but feel free to add, after the first person. And if we don't cover something, there'll be time for questions. And I had asked, if anyone had questions in advance. So first, I guess I wanted to start with Jason, because you're unique in you've got the nonprofit side, and we do have some teams in our group for Engage that are nonprofit companies. So can you touch upon the nonprofit realm perhaps versus the profit fundraising realm?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we look at the differences between nonprofit and for-profit fundraising, if I had to boil it down to one word, it would be motivation. Is what really inspires people to make that contribution or that investment? Because in most cases, it is really just that. When we are actively out soliciting dollars from our individual corporate and foundation supporters, there can be a financial element to it, where if it's a tax write-off or if it's a social good that they see that they might be able to accomplish and ultimately reduce expenses across some other element, if it's solving some kind of social good or what that might be. But at the end of the day, and I think what makes the work so interesting to me and to many of my colleagues who do this in the nonprofit space, is understanding donor motivations. Is what the reasons why my wife and I give away money are probably very different than what the other three panelists, their rationales for contributing to different organizations. And it can be just a sense of altruism, that it's the right thing to do. It's a belief that you are making a difference or some kind of a larger social impact. Perhaps you're solving a problem, looking for a social recognition. We've got a number of buildings on UWM's campus that have a donor's name affixed to that. And for many people, that is a rationale or reason to give significant amounts of money. But there's, even with that in mind, when you look at motivation, there is some overlap between the two of these. For nonprofit fundraising, we have to make our case. We have to make our case for why you would invest in our organization, as opposed to maybe, we don't call them competitors often, but realistically, there are other organizations serving a similar need that the organization and I might be looking to raise money for as well. So, what is your business case? Very similar to the for-profit side, or for those folks that are trying to get venture funding, is to figure out what differentiates them from maybe people that are working to do similar work. What are your plans? Our donors usually like to know that we're going to be around for more than the next 12 months. So, what do we hope to accomplish in the next 12 months? But then looking forward, what's our vision? What's our purpose? And how do we see that all playing out? To that point, impact. For ours, it tends to be more social impact. There's obviously that space in the middle of social impact investing as well. For a VC, that impact is likely going to be tied more to financial impact. Ours is maybe a little bit different story that we're looking to tell, but it's also that an understanding, and I think this is similar across the two, of our general position in that industry. What makes us different from other people? What are we doing that's unique? Do we have the finances to continue to make it beyond just that near term? And how do we kind of align with the work that we're doing across the space?
I guess the one thing we wanted to touch upon too is that early stage, perhaps before you even approach. And CJ, I don't know if you can touch upon that bootstrapping kind of friends and family route before perhaps they come to see someone like you.
Yeah. One of the things that I always try to tell founders before they even think about raising capital from anyone, whether it's family or friends, is, really planning out, does your business need to raise a lot of capital or not? I think a lot of entrepreneurs in today's world assume that that's always the answer. And I don't, and this isn't necessarily the most self-serving thing, but I think a lot of businesses, that people start don't necessarily need a person like me. And I think entrepreneurs are probably worse off for, thinking they have to. And so, I would start there even before you start, talking to friends and family. And depending on what your answer is there, I think you would handle that dynamic differently, and especially locally too, where the early stage ecosystem isn't necessarily as robust as places on the coast. I think bootstrapping is, to the extent you can, is a great advantage here. And, some of the founders that I respect most have done that and have, started out bootstrapping and, assumed they were going to raise capital and never had to. And so, I think from those early stages, kind of being a little scrappy if you can is great. And then it really comes down to, what are the trade-offs of you bootstrapping, right? You obviously, need to consider paying yourself. And so, what does all that look like? And I think that's where family and friends can come in and kind of help bridge that gap. But I think before you go down that path, the main thing to think about is, is VC early stage financing really right for you? And I think you would handle the early stages of bootstrapping family and friends differently. So, I've known founders that raised from family and friends up to 2 million, literally from 150 different folks. I know, folks that have raised 10,000. So, there's a different path for every business. But I think it all starts with, what will your fundraising path be, and what do you really want out of the business? And Stephen, I don't know if you have any comments as being kind of a more active in the angel community too, what your thoughts are on that.
I was going to ask you if you had any words of warning of taking money from family and friends. You know, that could be uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinners if you know, if you took money from your uncle and he's wondering when he's going to get his return. Yeah. And right, so any words of warning?
I think yeah, it's clearly can be uncomfortable for both sides. You know, I think the main thing is level setting that most startups fail. You know, I have to know that as a VC too, right? Every 10 companies I have conviction on, the numbers say 7 of them, 6 of them probably won't work. And, startups are really hard. And so I think level setting that with the people that you care most about, your friends and family, is way more important than, having a VC understand that. So that, that's where I would start. The person I talked about who raised $2 million from family and friends is actually a family member of mine. So, I understand those dynamics a little bit, and he's handled the situation pretty well. But, when you talk to that many people that well and ask them for money, it can strain the relationship. So, he's done it very well. But I think you need to be upfront and say, hey, here's why I'm excited about it. This is why I'm willing to quit my job or not pursue other things. And here's my conviction. But, it is startups, they fail, and, hopefully you learn from that. So just level setting that, I think, is important.
And maybe I can just jump on here too. When you're at the proof of concept stage or early on, it is extremely difficult to raise capital from strangers. So you have to have a connection with somebody. Sometimes that's friends and family. Sometimes it's through networking. And I think we'll maybe talk more about that later on. But it is so difficult to raise money from strangers when you're at an early stage of development. So just keep that in mind. A lot of people have a great idea and they want to immediately start going and talking to the angel networks or a venture capitalist. And it's just way too early, because until you have something a little more solid, raising money from strangers is almost impossible.
Yeah, I definitely echo that from my perspective. It is really hard because, on both sides of the table, it effectively is a relationship of trust in a lot of ways. So it is hard, especially when there aren't necessarily numbers or metrics or even a product to really, show for. It's hard from a fund perspective to get comfortable with that.
Yep.
Great, thank you guys. Next, I wanted to touch upon other ways to get money, such as grants. And Steve, you've been involved in writing some of those and helping some of our teams now with that. Can you talk about some of the grants type funding?
Yeah, sure. And I think we're sort of working through this progression of, right, when you're really just getting that company from concept stage, trying to get some proof of concept, and you're bootstrapping to get funds. I think once you've got maybe more than just an idea on paper, and you've maybe got some data to back up whatever it is your venture is, you can start to consider looking at grants. I think there's a couple different ways of going about this. There's foundational grants, right? So, if you've got a particular, within healthcare, particular disease you're going after, right? There's lots of foundations specifically set up to fund those types of things, whether it's cystic fibrosis or IBD, or pick your favorite disease. There's probably a foundation around it that provides some grant funding. They're going to want to see a good amount of evidence that you've really got something here, though, right? So you've got to have proof of concept probably already demonstrated by the time you go out to them. They aren't going to fund something with just a concept. And oftentimes they're looking for, you've got some partnerships with folks who know what they're doing, an academic partnership, for example, or you've got inroads into industry that they're going to see that this is going to get out there and affect their patient population that they're trying to benefit. The other obvious place to go is sort of the governmental granting agencies. So, NIH, NSF, DOD, DOE, USDA, et cetera, they all participate in the SBIR program, and presumably that's what we're talking about here as far as grants go. And that's a great source of funds, right? It's what they call other people's money. You're not investing your own money. You're not even taking investor money who's expecting a return. It's essentially like free money. They're giving you money to advance your concept in the hopes that it's going to turn into something that's going to benefit society and create a sustainable business. So you don't have to pay that money back to the government when you get these NIH grants. So it's a great source of non-dilutive funding. It doesn't dilute ownership in your company. So it's a great source of funds. It's a great way to establish that proof of concept. You don't really need much more than a good idea on paper. It certainly helps if you're going after your phase 1 SBIR to have some data to help support that. They're going to want to see some evidence that there's reality here and it's not just fantasy. But you probably don't need a lot. So, that phase 1 is really meant to, so there's phase 1, 2, and 3 of these SBIR grants. That phase 1 is really meant to be proof of concept, retire some early technical risks in your business venture. It's smallish money. It's, typically around a couple $100K, depending on the agency. But it's enough to, do a little bit of work and, prove some concepts out and then go after the phase 2, which can be in the $1 million to $2 million range. Again, depending on what agency you're going after, that's when it starts to really be impactful for your business. So if you can raise a couple $1 million of non-dilutive funds, that can carry your business, typically for a year or two, depending how quickly you want to grow it. So again, just a great source of funds, but there are downsides to going after grants, right? It's a very lengthy process. So it's not like I've got this idea and I can get funding next month. It's typically, a year by the time you write an application and you get your funds, minimally 9 months or a year. And often, we have been pretty successful at my company in getting SBIR grants. We probably brought in about $3 million in grants so far. But it typically takes a couple cycles. So you put in one application, you get your review comments back. Maybe you get funded if you're really lucky on that first go round, but more than likely you're responding to reviews, putting in a second resubmission, and it's now longer than a year-long process. So it's not quick money. And then the other drawback is, now you're sort of tied to those aims. If your business decides to pivot, you've committed to those aims in that grant, which could be a very good thing, right? You hope those aims very much match your business strategies, but you don't necessarily want to be restricted from that if you see better opportunities to chase down for your company. So, you just got to think through if that makes sense for you. And then the pay lines or the success rates are fairly small, depending again on the agency. It's anywhere from sort of 10 to 20, maybe 25% success rates. So, you got to realize your likelihood of getting funding is small. And so that's why you got to keep putting in multiple applications. But, if you play the odds and you put in good proposals and you use the resources that are available to you, you'll certainly increase your chances of getting funding this way. So, and just a couple of recommendations, the Center for Technology Commercialization, the CTC, it gets money from the state, is a great resource. There's workshops they put on around how to prepare grants. They have folks like me who will do pre-reviews of your grants and give you feedback to help strengthen your applications and improve your odds of getting funding. And each university has these kinds of capabilities and support systems as well to help you put in your best grants. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It's great to get this funding early on in your company. Really helps you get it off the ground. Some companies continue to do this as they grow. You don't want to get on that treadmill of always looking to grants for funding, because that's just kind of a slow pace to go at. But certainly in the early stages of your company, it can be quite valuable.
Jason, how about in your realm with the grant option?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I was going to jump in there and just add a nonprofit perspective to it. I mentioned earlier about a key thing we look at is motivation and interest. And I think one area where foundations can be really helpful from a nonprofit side is they're usually fairly transparent about the areas that are their priority areas that they're looking to fund. So it ideally is kind of reduce a lot of chasing on your end and maybe pursuing paths that aren't that you really don't have a viable chance of getting funding. It's challenging when you're new to the space, either your organization's new or you're a first-time applicant, to be able to not only make that case, but to convince the trustees to kind of veer off course. I think we're probably all guilty of this, as we kind of are set in our ways and do things the way we do them. And what we have seen as foundations, and more specifically foundation trustees, can follow that path as well. We have these 10 organizations, we fund them this year, we'll fund them next year. So cracking and breaking into that can be challenging. You know, areas that you can help differentiate yourself from others, and not to get too far ahead, because I know we're going to talk about networks a little bit later, but you know, where you have from a nonprofit side, your board of directors, you know, if a trustee has a peer on that board, it's a lot easier than me sending in a cold proposal where I don't have a strong relationship with that person. I've got someone who can at least vouch for me and for the organization, say that we're doing good work. Mission alignment obviously helps. History and reputation helps. You know, I work for an organization now that's been doing this work for over 50 years, and we've got the metrics that say that what we're doing works. If you're new to this space, if you're, say, a year or less in, it's a little bit harder case to make. You're looking more, this is our plan and our vision for what we hope to do, but at this time, maybe we're a little bit shy on those metrics. So to Steve's point, I mean, there could be a time frame. I mean, there's some grants that we've worked on for a long time to get the answer that we had hoped for. There's others that we've been able to apply and fit within those deadlines and get a, you know, comparatively relatively quick response.
Thank you. Okay, so moving ahead, another topic I had on the list was one other way to get money, potential for business loans. Anyone can feel free to jump in on there, or, you know, what's available if you're familiar with, you know, through Wisconsin and their different loans, if any of you have used those.
Yeah, I can respond there. I would say loans are typically difficult to get for a startup company. You know, you don't have a whole lot of assets to back them up. So, you know, if you're willing to you know, personally guarantee a loan with your own personal assets, that's one thing. But, you know, most startups, you know, form as an LLC or as a C Corp, et cetera. And you know, people don't necessarily want to put up their own personal assets to back up a loan. And so without company assets at that stage, most banks will not loan you money. You know, certainly it depends on the business too, right? If you're starting a restaurant or a bakery or something like that, you know, they'll maybe loan against the equipment you're going to buy because they realize they can sell that equipment at some point to kind of make their loan money back if they need to. But there are some opportunities to get loans. So WEDC through the state has, I think they still have this loan program. It's kind of a matching program. I think it's a 3-for-1 or 4-for-1 match. So you've got to show the history of being able to raise money, whether it's grant money or investor money, and they will provide some loans, some percentage of that, like I said, a 3 or 4-to-1 match against some money that you've demonstrated you've raised in the last year. And it's, you know, lower interest rate loans. It could be a good source to get some capital. And there's other, you know, mechanisms for getting loans, but you typically have to show that you've got some revenues before, you know, other states loaning agencies would be interested in loaning you your business money. So for an early stage company, it's a little tough to get business loans.
Okay. All right, Lauren, let's touch upon the angel investor versus the venture capitalist. You know, what stage you might go to each and what they're looking for.
Well, I can touch on some of that, and then I'd ask for Steve to help too, because he's more probably in tune with what angel investors are looking for at the earliest stage. The rule of thumb, obviously, is you tend to go to angel investors at a slightly earlier stage than you would go to an institutional investor like a venture capitalist. Sometimes the venture capital funds will actually have sort of a portion of their fund designated for seed investments or very early stage investments, but they tend to like you to be a little further down the path. So Steve, you want to talk a little bit about at what stage, what's the earliest stage an angel investor network might look at something?
Sure. So, you know, just to elaborate a little bit on the Golden Angels, I had mentioned earlier, we're about 100 accredited members. The way the model works is we've got a couple of different committees. One is a healthcare committee that I participate in, will screen all the healthcare related deals, and the other is sort of a catch-all, looks at everything else that comes through the door. You know, typically you network in some way or another. Somebody makes a referral in, you know, one of our members will sort of screen the deal, kind of have a one-on-one meeting with you, decide if it's something that might be of interest for the other members to consider. And then you go through a little more formal diligence process. And what we're looking for, you know, our group is pretty agnostic. There's other angel groups that are very focused on particular industries. Say it might be life sciences, life science angel group is looking just at life science opportunities, et cetera. But ours is really agnostic. We'll look at all different disciplines. And so no specific requirements there. But then the stage is typically pretty early, as Lauren indicated. It's typically seed stage. So seed stage might be companies that are looking to raise, less than $1 million or a couple million, maybe at the most. So you have some proof of concept. It's very early stage, but you need money to really build out a prototype to get in people's hands or to get your first revenues. It'd be great if if everybody who came to us already had revenues. You've got much more confidence in those kinds of companies. I'd say almost no companies that come to us as an angel group have products that they're selling. If it's a software application, you want to have an application where you can put in people's hands and you could start getting users and you start to demonstrate some traction. So we typically get in on the early stages. In the dollar sizes of contribution that we would commit to companies really depends. So the way it works is the company would present to all of our members at, say, a dinner meeting, and then each individual member decides whether they want to contribute or they want to invest in this company or not, and at what level. And so we basically pass the hat around effectively and decides, add up the dollars that people are committing to this and then make one single investment in that company. And that check size can range from probably on the low end, 100,000, and on the high end, is probably $1 million. And we typically, our sweet spot is a couple $100K, 300 to 500,000.
And then I can continue on a little bit. Steve said, if you're looking for $1 million, $2 million, angel networks are a good place to go. If you need more than that, you're probably looking at needing to raise it from an institutional investor. A typical venture capital fund, unlike the angel investor network where people are making their own individual networks, is more of a blind pool of money that people and institutions have committed to the venture capital fund, and then it's professionally managed by one or two or a group of individuals who are taking a management fee out of the investor's money and looking to deploy and return that money then to the investors over a 10 to 12 year period. Any company that I work with that's looking to approach venture capitalists, one of the things that I encourage them to do is to pre-qualify any venture fund, because each venture fund is looking for different things. They're not all alike. They're not all investing in the same thing, although they do like to co-invest with each other. But some venture capital funds won't invest in drug development just because the process takes too long and it requires too much capital. If the fund is too large, if it's $1 billion fund and you're just trying to raise $5 million, they don't have the time to spend on $5 million investment. So that's probably not a good fit. So what you're looking for is to find a good fit with any venture capital funds that you are approaching. Your pitch had better be very polished, because these funds look at a lot of different deals in any given time period, and they don't fund very many of them, probably less than 10%. So make sure that you've got your story down pretty solidly, and make sure you know what you're asking for, why you're asking for it, and how these investors, again, most of these VC funds, their sole purpose is to make money for the people that have committed money to their fund. So you want to make sure that you're able to explain how they're going to make money for their investors, or whether it's going to be in the form of an exit or how that process is going to happen for them. You'll have a much better chance. And then the last thing that I'll mention is be prepared to be told no. If you're trying to raise $3-4 million, even if you've got a pool of 20 different venture capital funds that seem to fit the right size profile, your chances of actually getting in to make a presentation to any one of them is probably only about 1 in 4. And even if you get through that, your chances of them doing due diligence on you is even less. The bottom line is, if you get 1 or 2 venture capital funds who are interested after you've talked to to 20, you're doing pretty well. So, but along the way, you got to have pretty thick skin because you're going to get told no a lot. Or more likely, and I know this is frustrating to entrepreneurs, you're not going to be told no. You're going to say, oh, that's very interesting. Keep me informed as to your progress. So they never really tell you no, but they never commit to anything either. So.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I
and I
want
think
to touch on that point that Lauren said, because I think one thing that entrepreneurs can do in response to that, which I encourage folks to do, is say, okay, tell me why you don't want to invest and what do I have to do? What do the metrics need to look like? Who do I need to hire? What does this need to look like for you to be more interested? And in 6 months, if you can come back to that person and say, look, I did everything you told me to do, then maybe they'll come up with another reason. Okay, all that looks great, but then this, and then you go do the same thing 6 months later. Not only have you proven all the things that they asked you to do, and hopefully your business is in a better spot for it, but from a VC perspective, you're like, wow, this is a great founder. Like, they're going to do the stuff that I want them to do, and they're doing it. And so not only, hopefully does that improve your business, but also from an investor perspective, you kind of force them to kind of put their money where their mouth is, which I think is a great thing to do.
I would just add one thing from a nonprofit standpoint, because we also get told no more than we'd like to. But and if we could actually see Brian's photo, we would see the tears well up right now. Is thinking about those questions that are posed in the book, The Mom Test, which I know is something that Brian. See, look at him; he's loving it. Is where you can get to your funders and their actual behaviors. What are the types of projects they funded in the past? What's been their typical cycle that they funded? Is it for a lot of what we're seeing on the philanthropic side is people are starting to pull back from multi-year funding requests. They're kind of doing a year at a time and seeing how you progress. So getting a sense for those actual behaviors that we have found has been really helpful, because then we can make changes as appropriate.
CJ,
Brian didn't put me up to mention
sorry.
that, by the way. So I just did that on my own.
Thank you. No, I just want to say, CJ, you have a newer fund with Right Height. What levels are you guys looking at investing?
Still TBD, to be honest. The first deal we did was a Series B company. So that company raised $60 million and we were a part of that. The stuff we're kind of honing in on right now is more like Series A. So any company that's raising probably over 5 million. But what I will say from an entrepreneur perspective too, if you can figure out ways to engage the VC community earlier rather than later, I mean, this whole ecosystem is built on personal networks. And so, kind of back on my previous point of kind of, making the VCs put their money where their mouth is in a lot of ways and proving them, I did everything you asked. If you can go to them and say, what do I have to do over the next 18 months that would make this interesting for you? And getting that feedback from the market, I think, can be a helpful thing too. Because, per Lauren's point, the average venture capital partner probably sees anywhere between 600 and 1,000 deals a year, and they pick 3 to 5. And so I bet those 3 to 5 more times than not are founders that they've built up a rapport with too. So figuring out how to do that, I think is a huge advantage for founders.
And one thing you could do in that 6 month time frame is create some FOMO, some fear of missing out, right? So a big reason why VCs will say it's too early or come back to us, it's a no for now, but let me know how this progresses, right? They don't want to miss out on a good deal, so they never want to say no, because they never know when the next Uber or the next unicorn is waiting around the corner. So if they see your company is gaining this huge momentum, you've got some name brand venture capitalists that are starting to back you, or even quality angels that are backing you, like that increases their momentum and their fear of missing out, and they want in on that deal. So if you can come back and show traction, you can come back and show traction with investors, and give them the sense that they're missing out on this opportunity, they're more likely to engage with you. So that's one of the reasons why they hate to say no to you and just really cross you off their list. But it's good to understand what their motivations are, right? if they're saying you'll come back later, and sometimes this is really true, it's too early for them. They're a Series A investor, not a seed stage. So you're too early, but it's not a bad thing to have these conversations with them early. And to CJ's point, you come back 6 months, a year or so later, and you've demonstrated progress, and now you're raising your Series A. They've already got a relationship with you. They trust you. You've delivered what you said you're going to do, and you're in a much better position to repitch them at that time.
Steve, we also have a question for you in the chat regarding a comment on 100,000. What do you ask for?
Yeah, I saw that from Cindy. So that's a great question. So that kind of gets to, what do they get for their money, right? So they're investing in your company because they essentially want a piece of your company. They get equity in your company. They get shares issued in your company typically. And we could talk about convertible notes and priced rounds, et cetera. But they're looking for a percentage of your company in exchange for giving you money. And the typical rule of thumb is, you don't want to give away too much more than 20% of your company in any one fundraising round. There's, it could be higher than that, could be lower than that, but that's generally the sense. So you've got to figure out what the value of your company is prior to that investment. And then, they're going to invest, whether it's $100K or $10 million or whatever it is. You don't want to necessarily be giving up too much of your company. And quite honestly, you might think that investors are looking to get as big of a piece of pie as possible. They want you to be invested in your company too. They don't want to take over, 75% of your company, and you as the founder get so diluted out. This is not meaningful to you anymore. They want you invested in the success of that company so that you're going to financially benefit from that at the end when you have an exit in your company. So they don't really want to take too much of a big piece of pie either. So everybody should be aligned on that same sort of mission of taking an appropriate amount of your company, but sort of 20% rule is the rule of thumb. And Lauren or CJ, I'd be curious to hear if you think differently.
No, and I would echo all of that. One of the challenges, and it almost always comes to pass that a founder thinks that their company is worth more than they're going to get in the early rounds. I have always encouraged the founders that I work with, including myself, because I have made this mistake. And if you get too high a valuation in the early rounds, it's really difficult to have a down round later on. So be realistic. What you want to make sure is that you don't run out of money or somehow end up pricing the company in a way that subsequent investors don't have room to come in. If you can do that, don't be too greedy in the beginning, and you'll usually have a bigger payday. Well, I shouldn't say usually, but you'll have higher potential for having a bigger payday at the end. So, and CJ, I'm really interested in your perspective on valuation as well for these early stage companies.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Valley perspective, and then there's kind of the rest of the world, I would say. I totally agree. I think the amount of capital that has been thrown into startups in the last 5 years, and it's increasing every year, has made it really easy for founders to, drive up their valuations from an early stage. And I think people are starting to realize that, that's to a detriment at some point. And I think, the best founders have started to realize that it's not about what my valuation is, 3 million versus 5 million, but it's, okay, if I'm worth 50, can I attract the capital? And am I still in a good spot from an ownership perspective? So I think that's one element. And, there are those deals that, you'll see the news on, 40-person company valued at $1 billion. There was a unicorn with only 40 employees this past year. So like those still will happen. But that's 5 deals a year. And then the rest, I think, don't really fit into that band. So I would just say, don't also let the headlines of these deals determine what your perspective of your company is. There's a lot behind those. And so, yeah, I think valuation from the early stage is a place where, understandably, right, you want to own a large part of your business. You want to be incentivized to do it, which is why, when I first kind of talked about the early stages and bootstrapping, that's why I think it's so important. If you can minimize the dilution in those earliest stages, putting that off and off as far as you can, I think we'll avoid some of those situations.
And Karen, I see specifically asked about valuations, and the later stage your company is, right? If you're selling products and you're sort of in growth mode, it's much easier to put a valuation on the company. It's a multiple of your revenues, or it's a multiple of your profits. But early stage companies, it's largely guesswork. Starting company, you can say it's worth $1 million just based on a concept, right? And it's really dependent on what's the market opportunity. So is this a drug therapeutic and it's got $1 billion potential? Sure, $1 million is reasonable. If this is a company that's going to grow to be $1 million company, you're not going to start out with $1 million valuation. You're going to start with a company that's worth $50,000 or $100,000. So you got to kind of think about what pond you're swimming in to set your early valuation. Do you have anything tangible? Do you have IP that you've developed or licensed or have applied for? What's, and a large part of this is probably the quality of the team. So I guarantee if Elon Musk wanted to start a company today, it would probably start on paper as $1 billion, valuation company. But somebody like me has not got that reputation. And so just the quality of the team is going to matter in putting a valuation on an early stage company. So it's really, kind of, sticking your finger in the air and figuring out which way the wind is blowing, and trying to pick a valuation that you and your investor are happy with. And largely at the end of the day, the investor is going to set the rules because they're giving you the money to fund your company. But it's more of an art than it is a science to put a valuation on an early stage company when you don't have any kind of traction or metrics to gauge against.
And at the end of the day, it's it's a negotiation between you and the investor. So depending upon how sophisticated the investor is and all of that, one of the problems is getting especially friends and founders friends and family are going to be putting money in. Or I've seen medical companies it's a group of doctors putting it in, and they end up putting it in a fairly high valuation. And again, this speaks to my earlier point is, it's tough to raise money from real institutional investors later on because the early valuation was just too high. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of these, early stage companies, if you've got some IP, provisional patents or issued patents, even better, filed, you've got a really well mapped out strategy to getting to commercialization, and you're going to, and Steve, you can help me out here, but going to angel investors or to a seed investor of any kind, if they're going to be putting $500,000 in, or, 300 to $500,000 in, they're going to expect 20 to 25% of the company, which gives you a couple $1 million valuation roughly. I wish it was more scientific than that, but that's just kind of where the numbers always seem to come out if you're getting your first investment that way. So Steve, you're nodding your head. I guess I'm not too far off for a change.
No, that's exactly right. That's how the valuations are determined. It's partly how much money am I putting in because I want to own significant enough amount of your company that it's going to make sense for me. And it's the numbers seem to always work out about that. At an early stage company, it's $1 million to a $3 million valuation unless you really have some good traction going for you in a quality team.
I might be reaching to make a nonprofit connection here, but that's never stopped me in the past. So, you know what? I know one thing that we see is we've been very fortunate to have some significant benefactors who give very large gifts to support our work. A question that we get from them, or maybe even a concern is a better way to describe it, is they don't want to account for too much a portion of the revenue that we're bringing in. When we're actively working on a project right now with a potential lead funder, and their gift could account for 50% of the total project cost. And candidly, it's concerning to them right now. And so from a nonprofit perspective, as you have that diversity of funding, that you're not too reliant on any one individual, we have seen that our philanthropic partners tend to feel better about that. And it also puts you in a better spot that if their interests start to redirect or, things change, it's, an example that maybe predates a lot of folks on this call, but there once upon a time was a Milwaukee Shakespeare organization. And when the donor that accounted for 90% of their revenue redirected, Milwaukee Shakespeare left shortly after that.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I just have one more question, which I think, some folks had asked offline as well, but, and we'll keep an eye on the chat. Basically then, like, when are you ready to pitch? And I think you all touched upon this a bit, and how do you prepare? We talked about having a really good pitch, be ready. Also, I think the team, you always have to have a decent team to really get any interest from an investor. So the final question was really about, when are you ready? What do you need to prepare? And like, how do you get that meeting? And you did touch upon using your network, but if there's anything you want to jump in on, that'd be great.
Well, a lot of it is just getting exposure. And I, would encourage everyone to, look for opportunities to expose your business idea to the greater public. One, and this is not exactly meant as a plug, but the Tech Council, the Wisconsin Governor's Business Plan Contest is the deadline for the initial abstract for that is January 31st or 30th, I believe. It's a great way. It accomplishes two things. One, it provides you with an opportunity to really think what your business plan is and really reduce it down to sort of its core essence. And if you make it through subsequent rounds, you have to keep putting together a more and more definitive business plan together as part of the process. And if you become a finalist, you're going to get a lot of press, which I know, Carol and Maria did with their company. And I'm not going to put Carol on the spot to talk about her experiences in that, but I think she would tell you that it was a good exposure for her company. And there are still, people who are in the VC funding world that say, oh yeah, I remember seeing your presentation. Okay, so people do pay attention, and you just are looking for as much exposure as possible. Carol, are you nodding your head there?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
Happy to give insight, advice, whatever, for people who are interested in this. It has been super helpful to have that exposure and experience.
And I would just echo Lauren's comments of, expose yourself as much as possible to mentors, to advisors, to groups like this. If you can practice pitches, there's, various contests and events and things like that you can apply to. So, certainly do that, because it'll, each time you do this, you get better and better and better at it. And you want to be in a very good position if you're really going out to angel or venture investors, that you've got a very polished pitch deck. And there's all sorts of, you can look online for all sorts of templates around what your pitch should consist of. It's typically 10 to 15 slides, the various elements that need to be in there. But you'll learn this as, as you talk to more people, you see, watch other people's pitches. There's examples of good and bad pitches on the internet as well. So just, do that as much as possible. And then you'll start to get good at it. And hopefully, you'll start to get traction with these investors, and they'll potentially give you some feedback. It's a great way to go into pitches, to say, look, I'm looking to get some advice on this particular aspect of my business. Let me walk you through my pitch, but I really want to ask you about my business model, et cetera. So, use those opportunities to not only ask for money, but to really get advice as well, particularly when you don't really need the money. It's great to start going in, asking for advice, and they'll start to remember you and pay attention to you and your business.
Yeah, I would say one other thing to add to, a lot of this tends to be cold outreach for some folks that don't have these existing networks. And I always think it's way better to send 10 cold emails that you spend an hour each on than, sending 50 that you spend 5 minutes. In finding the right people, folks, like Lauren, we get cold emails, and the ones that stand out, people who take time, and I send cold emails to startups too. And so I'm also on the other side of this too. If you spend the time and try to understand your audience of why are they a good fit to receive this message and what do they care about, I think your success rate will be way more than you think. And I think if you don't spend the time, your success rate probably won't be that great. So I think if you do cold outreach, really doing your research on who are the right folks to put this in front of, and why would this person specifically be interested in this, and making that concise, but also making it compelling at the same time.
And use LinkedIn if you can. See who you're connected to.
Absolutely. Jessica, if I could just jump in maybe with a 2-minute nonprofit version of it. I hate this answer, but when it's the right time to ask, it depends. Depends on the individual, depends on the organization. You know, I know one thing that we look at, and a thing that I know that we teach in this field is the idea of a moves management process, where you are identifying potential supporters or investors. You're starting to qualify that organization or individual or institution. You're starting that cultivation, that education journey. Eventually, you're going to get to the point, and there's probably more science to it. I feel like if for me and a lot of my colleagues, if it's not deadline driven, it's a lot more gut driven, where it's like, it's the time to ask. We've had that conversation to actually solicit them for their investment or support. And then that stewardship process where you're really talking about the impact of their contribution. So, and investors and donors can come in at different cycles of that. That journey is going to depend if it's putting together a pitch deck, if it's a proposal, or if it's sitting across the table from someone and having a conversation. But, you know, getting that meeting, to CJ's point, I mean, we send out a lot of cold requests. Sometimes they're helpful, but if it is a trustee, an advisor, a client, you know, somebody who has a connection and can vouch for you. There's a lot of times that I've written those letters or those emails for the person who's going to make that introduction, just to remove one additional barrier to making that happen. Trying to kind of channel their voice in the whole thing, and it's been really helpful where that relationship, where I can help to have someone broker that relationship.
Thanks, everybody. We only have a couple minutes left. I see there is a question from Maria about what is a convertible note in the fundraising process, if someone might be able to talk a little bit about what that is.
Lauren, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take it quickly. And it's probably not a 2-minute answer to this,
Right.
but the bottom line is if you have a convertible note that an early investor will put in that will be convertible into equity at the next priced round, it helps kick the valuation can down the road a little ways. From the company's perspective, it's usually a pretty good idea. More and more, I'm seeing that angel investors and others aren't real wild about the convertible notes. There are a couple of tax issues if you're converting from an LLC with a convertible note into a C corporation, which you probably are going to have to do if you're taking institutional money and things like that. So there's a number of complications. There's not a quick and easy answer to that. But again, from the company standpoint, if you've got somebody willing to put in a convertible note and it's not going to hurt you in terms of raising real equity capital later on, I say go for it, but it's not that simple.
I would maybe contradict that a little bit. I'd say one of the big reasons to do a convertible note is it's simple, right? So in this difference, I think a little bit depend on where you are in the country, but so I was in an accelerator program for 6 months out in the West Coast in Silicon Valley area, in the Bay Area. Convertible notes are very common out there. In fact, if you're raising anything under $2 million, it's typically done on a convertible note, and people out there are very comfortable with it. There's very well-defined forms about what goes into a convertible note, the terms and conditions, et cetera. And it's quick. It's minimal paperwork. You don't have to have a lawyer get too deep involved in writing up a convertible note and bringing in money on that. So there's a lot of upside to convertible notes. In the Midwest, I think there's a little more aversion to it. And Lauren pointed out a couple of reasons, tax reasons being one of them. So, in my angel group particularly, it doesn't like them for that very reason, for tax reasons. But, convertible note can be a quick and a quicker way of bringing in money.
Well, I want to respect everyone's time. I know we all jump from Zoom to Zoom these days. This was amazing. I recorded it, so happy to send that out to all of you. Shoot me, I think many of you were invited. If not, just send me your email address if you'd like a copy of the video. And I'd like to put it up on YouTube for the Research Foundation, if that's okay, just in case, so we have it saved somewhere. So this is great. And the panelists put some of their emails in the chat. So feel free, to contact if you have questions.
Yeah, the one thing I'll quickly add about a convertible note is I would be careful if you're a founder, because for certain companies, it makes a lot of sense per Steve's point. low legal costs, easy to close, things like that. But if you're not careful, you'll be forced to continuously raise only on convertible notes, which means you're just punting the valuation discussion further and further down. So I would, if you're going down that path, I would just make sure that you're at least, you're planning on having an equity round somewhere in the foreseeable future, or else you will get into trouble. And it's kind of complicated why that happens, but trust me, it's not good when it happens.
Thank you. All right. Well, everyone have a good afternoon. And again, feel free to reach out anytime. We'll think about our next panel.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Everybody have a great day.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.